I just want to say hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the podcast that I think it's episode 18 or 19 now. They're going really well. We would like to get more followers, more likes, more shares. If we could get more subscribers, then that would be amazing. Because we just need to get our voices heard. We need to get this scandal out there. And I would just like to introduce my guest today. She is known as oneclick. That is a Twitter username. So if you would like to just introduce yourself, please, to everybody else. I mean, we've spoke before in depth, but I just want everybody else to meet you and tell your story, basically, have your voice heard.
Hi, Debbie. Thanks very much for having me on. As Debbie said, my name on Twitter is oneclickboedicea, and I tweet a lot about family court. And very briefly, the background to me tweeting about family court is having lost my child to a coercive controller who stopped all contact with my child 5 years ago. And so I've spent on and off the last 5 years in family court, was refused a fact finding on 19 years of domestic abuse, have had my health disintegrate because of that, £65,000 worth of financial abuse, and was done with a non-mole. My ex got my child to take out a non-mole against me to prevent her from being given safeguarding assessments that named her as a co-victim of coercive control too. So I've seen this system inside and out, in far greater depth than I would like to have. And certainly I have witnessed so much malpractice, because I come from a professional background. I used to do crisis management and work at CEO level with international companies such as Tesco and Dulux, doing their crisis management. I have never seen such poor professional practice as I have come across in family court from the judiciary, legal experts as well, people like the police, social services, quite a lot of domestic abuse support as well. Most people seem to be completely untrained. Mm-hmm. They seem completely disinterested. They have relied on my child at age 12 to do all of the risk assessing of our situation, despite the fact that she's an active kidnap victim, trapped by a guy that breaks ribs when he doesn't get his own way. So I would have thought that situation on its own would have had the professionals, with their ears pricked, saying, we need to be very careful in this situation and do a really strong risk assessment.
Yeah.
And instead, what they have all done without fail, from judges through to social workers through to carcass, as I call them, and the police, have sat there and gone, any mention of domestic abuse, well, just tuck that in under that stone there, and we'll pretend it's not there. And that, to me, is it's complete malpractice.
Yeah.
So that's sort of what I would like to talk about today.
Yeah.
Really, rather than getting into the ins and outs of what my ex is like.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you okay to speak about kind of not the beginning of your relationship with your ex, but because I think that's a line that we can't cross today and speak about any of that. But how did it all sort of start? What was the first point of call? Was it the police that got involved first?
Well, me and my ex split up back in 2010.
Right.
And then we kind of parallel parented. I mean, I didn't really know an awful lot about coercive control. In fact, I really didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
And so all I knew was that he was just very, very difficult to co-parent with. And almost, all of our communication was only done via email. Essentially, pretty much all of the Christmas and school holidays, I would just give him the choice of whatever dates he wanted. We had to go to mediation to sort out sort of who was doing what childcare, because prior to mediation, he was just kind of turning up whenever he felt like it, and he would let me down constantly.
Yeah.
And so what I wanted to do was to set up a situation where basically we were parenting 50-50, so that there would be no room for him to say, oh, she's not letting me see the child, any of that sort of stuff. And it also meant that I would have time separately from my child in order to be able to go out and earn a living, so that I then financially was independent of him.
Yeah.
So and at the time, although I thought he was really difficult to work with me, and I thought that some of his behaviour was it wasn't very sympathetic or protective of our child, I didn't see it as being as abusive as, now that I know what I know about some of his behaviour in the background. I wasn't aware that would likely be going on in the background, and that he would be behaving towards our child in pretty much the way that he behaved towards me.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that. So he applied for adoption with his current partner, and was turned down on the basis of they had to interview me about my experiences of parenting with him. And although I'd said originally to him, I don't want to get involved, he said, no, I don't have any problem with you, saying whatever you want to say, just tell the truth, which I then did and evidenced. And a year later, he had taken my child completely.
And how long has she not been in your care now?
I have
5 years, did you say?
I've had no contact with her apart from the non-mole and a single family therapy session in 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been like she's essentially disappeared off the face of the earth. And the little bits that I've seen of her, I see what she says in Kafka's interviews, and, in the family court process, obviously she's been required to give evidence, or in the non-mole, she was required to give evidence. And it sounds and seems like a completely different person speaking. Completely different.
Yeah.
So I have some sympathy for people who who are going through what they call parental alienation. But I think actually, in real cases where a child is being brainwashed, the coercive control framework fits an awful lot better, because there's a far bigger pattern. It's just, what is happening with the child is just an extension of what happened with the parent.
Yeah. Yeah. And when can you pinpoint where the catalogues of failings started?
Well, almost the moment, well, yeah, pretty much the moment he took her, and actually beforehand, because unbeknownst to me, he'd already started reporting me to social services, and saying that my home was dangerous and unsafe, and he was programming my child to say the same thing at her school. And unfortunately, the children's services that he was reporting this to didn't they didn't come and ask me, whether my home was dangerous and unsafe. And so I wasn't alerted to the fact that he had began this campaign of denigration. And that happened pretty much about a year before he cut all contact. So he'd started this campaign pretty much from the moment he was turned down from the adoption. He began to make a series of false allegations to my child first and foremost, and then using her to present those to various different safeguarding professionals, such as obviously her school and children's services.
And did school contact you to raise these
No,
issues with you? You
no,
see, you
not at all.
see,
They
you
went,
see. This is a common one. This, because schools seem to be turning a blind eye to quite a lot of things that are happening. Because surely
I think
you should have been aware of all of this going off.
no, no, like the school didn't tell me, and nor did children's services. So if they had told me, I mean, this was all while he was at the same time saying to me that my daughter had suffered very, very bad bullying at school, and so he was saying that the local authority had offered her a place in her secondary school with 6 boys, that she'd already had to leave one school to get away from, and they were, bullying her really badly, to the point of a low-level sexual assault. My daughter was having to go to hospital and all sorts. So, when they told me that the school that she'd been allocated, those boys were going to be at that school, she was beside herself with fear, and so was I. Because, as I said, she'd already had to move schools once to avoid them, and now they were sending her back. And obviously, with those boys being that much older now, and hormones beginning to kick in, and
Yeah.
the effects of pornography and stuff like that, I was just sitting there thinking, this is only going to go one direction, and it's not upward. So he knew all of that. He knew how worried my daughter was. He knew how worried I was. And so he suggested that he was going to move out of town with his new partner. And he suggested that my daughter go to school during the week where they were, and then come home and live with me every weekend. And so that's what
Right.
we set up. But as I said, if I'd known that he was running this campaign of denigration about me in the background, I would have instantly sat there and went, no, that's not going to be suitable, because he is gaslighting her, he's gaslighting me, he's beginning to he's making false allegations to various professionals. And so the element of risk around us has gone up hugely.
Yeah.
But nobody was risk assessing what was going on, either at her school or in children's services. They weren't doing any risk assessment of what he was doing, despite the fact that children's services knew that he had a history of domestic abuse, because he'd already been arrested, and they had been involved in that arrest, or in the kind of follow up to that arrest, because of the fact that he'd attacked me in front of our child. And so they'd failed in that situation as well, because they refused, after he'd been arrested, they came and did a whole check of my house and a check of my parenting. And then I was saying, okay, they said, oh, you pass fine with flying colours and you're, parenting appropriately. And then I said, well, what are you doing about him? Because obviously he's the person that's been dragged out of the house by the police. And then they said, we're not doing anything about him because he's already proved that he's an irresponsible parent, so we're not engaging with him.
What?
And I said, but why would you not engage with the parent that's bringing the violence into the house? And they said, well, that's not how we do it. So, I mean, in the end, I complained about that to the manager.
Did it get you anywhere?
I got a letter of apology saying that it wasn't what they were meant to do, and that the social worker involved was sending an apology. But that's all that happened.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, my ex was going along. He joined a perpetrators program, so it kind of looked like he was addressing his behaviour, but then after a bit I found out that he'd only done a couple of sessions and then stopped going. So they wrote to me after about 10 weeks and said, oh, we've suspended him from the course because he's broken his commitment to us and therefore is likely to have broken it to you.
What do you
What
do you think about these perpetrator programs? Do you think they work?
I don't know. I mean, I've got no idea because he only did a couple of sessions with them. And then what he was using, the perpetrators course, I mean, what I found is that he initially, because he then moved back in, I thought he had completed the perpetrator course program. That's what he told me. And so he moved back home. And then what I found was initially it did seem that he was trying to address his behaviour, and he would, whenever he felt his anger rising in an argument or a disagreement, he would ask for a timeout. Or he would tell me he was taking a timeout. But then what I began to realise after a bit was that he would make whatever points he wanted to make and then use the timeout as a way of sort of saying, gotcha, that's my last word on the subject, now I'm out.
Yeah.
So I found what it did for him was give him a lot of what sounded like on the surface, kind of woke language, a way of sort of, it gave him a kind of network of language that made it sound like he was working on himself, but actually he wasn't, because he was manipulating everything in order to get the maximum.
Yeah, and I've actually heard that before, where the perpetrators actually use these courses to their advantage.
Well, he did, and he used it again in court, because when we went to family court, he said that he hadn't attended. He was sort of essentially trying to minimise his abuse, and so he said he hadn't attended a perpetrators course or been suspended from a perpetrators course because the reason that he'd stopped going was that he thought it was a men's health course.
Right.
And so when he went along to it a couple of sessions and then, decided that when he found out it was a domestic abusers course, he pulled out of it because he hadn't realised that was what it was.
So it's a serious thing then, is it? No.
Well, he then basically, I then contacted the perpetrator course because from my understanding, perpetrators course will not allow you to join. They won't sign you up unless you actually admit that you are willing to take responsibility that your behaviour is abusive. So I said to them, do you have a policy of informed admittance? And they said, yes, we do. He wouldn't have got on. He wouldn't have been able to attend our course unless he'd admitted that he used abuse. But by then, the problem is with the court system, and what I find is that the whole court system is so it's so designed to be based on lies. So, you're the abuser, just basically puts up, it's like a kind of wall of flack where he just lies upon lie upon lie upon lie, and his barrister's lying, and the gas officer is lying. It's like literally, as a victim, you're standing in court, and it's like
your jaw dropped. Your jaws just wide. You just mouth wide open in like complete. You're completely gobsmacked.
It is basically legalized abuse.
Yeah.
Because every single person in there is gaslighting, they're willfully manipulating the truth. It's like, essentially, excuse my French, it's like a tsunami of shit comes at you, and you're not allowed to say anything. And the legal representative, if you have a legal representative, they don't know that all of these people are lying. And so the trouble is, you're sitting there frantically either writing post-it notes or, kind of fiddling with their sleeves, saying, that's not true, that's not true, and that's not true either. And they're sitting there going, be quiet, we'll address that.
It's not relevant. It's not relevant.
But also, it never comes. And so all of that reputational damage is there. It's all been done. I mean, I was diagnosed with a mental health condition that a judge recommended to me as an aside. Within his final judgment, he said, my advice to you, he said in this very kind of patronizing fashion, is to go and get, like a report done on your mental health to answer, you're saying that you don't have this mental health problem, to answer your ex-partner's worries. And I'm sitting there going, the only person that has diagnosed me with a mental health condition is a gas engineer. He's got no mental health qualifications at all. And then you're telling me that because he's stopped all contact to protect our child from this so-called mental health condition, that I then have to go off and spend whatever, £6,000, £5,000 on a full-blown psychological assessment in order to prove that I don't have something that no one apart from a gas engineer has said that I have. Do you see what I mean? So it was a completely, court was sitting there, rather than saying nobody has proved her to have that condition that's got any qualifications. Instead, what they've said is, we accept that she has the qualification because that's what her ex is saying, and therefore she has to prove herself not guilty of that. And the entire court process was completely back to front. And whereas at the very beginning of the court process, I was asking for a fact-finding to be done, because, as I said, when I worked in crisis management for, multinational companies, if you've got a factory that's burning down, you've got to know, in order to mount a crisis response, you've got to know real basic facts like who, what, where, and when. Have you got anyone in the building? Where is the building? How much is it on fire? Is this reliable information? Because I've got to get emergency services to it, and I need to let them know how many people might be stuck in the building needing to be rescued. There is absolutely no way that I would sit there and go, I'm going to stick my fingers in my ears and shut my eyes, and I'm literally going to sit there going, la, 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 until the end of this process. And then we'll work out how many bodies we've got to pull out of the rubble. And then we'll sit there and go, oh, lessons will be learned. It's a missed opportunity. And this is a missed opportunity is something where you couldn't have known, given the information that you had at the time. That is a genuinely missed opportunity. If you're deliberately putting your fingers in your ears and shutting your eyes, that's not a missed opportunity. That is culpable homicide. If someone dies. I mean, certainly within I come from a corporate environment. The idea of any of my corporate clients sitting there going, we've heard that there are problems with the brakes on our car, but you know what? We're just going to leave it out there because not a lot of people have died, and the ones that have died, they're not worth much.
Yeah.
They're not rich. They're not famous. Why
Yeah.
would we care?
Yeah.
And whilst that may be a position that a very cynical company might try and get away with, the fact that your own government is doing that
Yeah.
to its own citizens
Yeah.
is something really quite, like it's basically like being back in an abusive relationship again,
Yeah.
but this time with your own government.
Yeah, it is 100%. And that's what it is. It's disturbing. It's disturbing to even think that. But I want to ask you what I know my reasons why I think that it's working as it should be doing. I think it all boils down to the amount of money that they're making from it. Because if they were to open those courtrooms up, I think that we'd start seeing a lot different outcomes. Sorry, as to what judgments were being handed down. Do you think the same as me, that if they were opened up, they certainly won't speak to victims? Judges won't speak to victims the way that they do. If they'd got public listening to how they were speaking to them, and I think that the judgment, the entire process would be an absolute 100% total different experience.
I think certainly if they open them up, that would be like, kind of secret courts are the, those are the kind of things that you see in South Africa and, when it was Rhodesia. Secret justice isn't justice. So it's the kind of thing of authoritarian regimes. But my feeling is that the money may be part of it, but it's the misogyny that this is, I know that when I was a kid back in the sort of 1970s, that was at the height of a lot of kind of radical feminism, and they used to talk about reproductive slavery as being one part of the feminist argument, and essentially I don't think that has changed. I think if you look at there was a great film with Keira Knightley in it called The Duchess, where a woman basically has her husband takes her children off her as a punishment, and I don't think that happens repeatedly throughout history. So I don't think this is about making money. The police don't prosecute rapists. They don't prosecute child sexual abusers. We're seeing multiple paedophiles going, who are being convicted and then getting no jail time. This is not about money. It's about misogyny and protecting abusive, sort of men's right to abuse. That would be my take on it.
Yeah.
But I certainly think the solutions are, sunlight. The more that you can drag this out into the open, the more that I think most people, I pray, are generally fair. And I think they don't like unfairness. And I think that if they could see what happens in family court, they would be absolutely appalled.
Yeah.
I mean, health injuries that I have suffered from the stress of the behaviour towards me. I mean, what my ex has done pales in comparison to what the authorities have done, because by the time that he took my child, I knew he was an arsehole. I knew he was a misogynist, etc., etc., etc. That's what I sort of expected of him. I didn't expect the same of social workers. I didn't expect the same of the justice process. I didn't expect that of MPs. I didn't expect that of the police. I've been brought up watching, sort of what essentially I now think of as propaganda. Programs on the BBC and the ITV and all of that about, that the police force was like Happy Valley. And that, they're not they might get overwhelmed, but essentially they were all out there trying to do good. And that has not been my experience since then. I think I've had okay experiences with the Met, but I've had other experiences down in where my ex-partner is, where at the moment I'm in a full-blown complaints process with them, where I'm trying to get them to look at what the IOPC called acts of omission, which is a case of gross misconduct according to the IOPC. And that is where basically police, when they go into an investigation, they start evidence sifting and they start witness sifting, so that they can bend the investigation to go the way they want it to go. And in most domestic abuse survivors situations, to close the investigation, to NFA it, because they sit there and go, well, we investigated it and we found that there was no case to be had. There's nothing we can do about this. And so for me, I'm sitting there going, you haven't taken a victim statement, you haven't done a risk assessment, you haven't interviewed multiple victim witnesses. You haven't asked for any evidence of all of the financial abuse that I've had to go through, the legal abuse, the defamation in court, the gaslighting. All of this is post-separation abuse. All of it is outlined in statutory guidance, both for the Domestic Abuse Act and Coercive and Controlling Behaviour statutory guidance. I can literally list it out and say, this corresponds with our case, and I can prove all of this, because helpfully, most of it he's said in court. And he's put into his court statement and he's signed as a declaration of truth. So he's very helpfully written it down, signed it and dated it. They sit there and the police then came back and said, it's just him expressing an opinion. And I said, no, that's not an opinion.
I'm supporting in a case at minute, and do you know what? The amount of evidence that they have been sat on for nearly 3 years, over 2.5 years, right? And the evidence that has been lost, it's been ignored, and it's just horrendous how they can get away with it. It's like, what planet are we on where we've got officers, we've got police forces that have got posters up in police stations, waiting rooms, right? And you know this because you're laughing, so I know you know what's coming. Where they are actually encouraging women to come forward and speak out, right? And then look at what they are faced with. They are faced with, and they know what they're going to be faced with. That's the thing.
I think it is the equivalent. I mean, I was, when my child was first taken, I went to my local domestic abuse, so I was given an IDVA, and by my local domestic abuse agency, and repeatedly she kept saying, well, you just need to go to the family court. And this will all get sorted out there. And because it's a child contact matter, so the only people that can deal with it is family court. There was no evidence. There was no warning given to me about how abusive that situation was. There was no kind of like vague framework. The solicitor that I employed was one that they had put me recommended to me, and that solicitor didn't even tell me that on the first session that we did in family court, they refused to do a fact finding, even though I was saying that this is the way that you're meant to deal with contested allegations of domestic abuse. And they were sitting there going, well, the domestic abuse was back when you lived with him. So it's historic, it's not relevant. And I was like sitting there going, this guy's just kidnapped my child. It's
Do you know
absolutely, it's
what? Do you know
ongoing.
what? It's like we're laughing about it because that is the reaction that, sometimes I have to turn things into a humorous side, because I think if I didn't try, I would crack up, because you've got to have a certain way of being able to cope with things, haven't you? You've got to, because you would seriously end up seriously, wouldn't you? I mean, I were at death's door through it.
Well, I through going within 6 months of entering family court, I had lost 5 teeth. They just dropped out of my head. I developed rheumatoid arthritis,
Yep,
fibromyalgia,
yep,
complex post-traumatic stress
yep,
disorder. And what I was saying when I was being interviewed by the police recently, and they were sort of sitting there going, you know, like sort of, you know, sort of what's been going on in the last 5 years, and they were sort of dismissing that and saying, well, these are, these are just health issues. And I said, no, they're not issues, they're injuries. I said, I've got a letter from my rheumatoid arthritis consultant saying that there is a link between
trauma,
extreme stress,
yeah,
extreme
yeah,
trauma, and autoimmune conditions, of
yes,
which rheumatoid
yeah.
arthritis and
I've got
fibromyalgia.
rheumatoid arthritis as well, and I have to.
Well, I've got it
Have you?
worse.
Have you? Bless you. I have to inject myself every week. Do you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, no,
yeah.
all of that. But I think if you listen to people, I know that at the height of, when I was pregnant before I had my child, I lost two pregnancies,
Mhm.
and I can't prove it, but I know that was directly linked to the amount of stress I was under, both from my ex-partner and also the job that I was doing. I was doing crisis management.
Yeah.
And I was,
Mm.
regularly, my job was very, very, very stressful.
Yeah.
And I was working with a team of people who were all, I mean, I was meant to have a team of 6 working on one account, and there was me and half of a junior executive
Mm.
trying to run a, £2 million
Yeah.
account.
Yeah.
It was like I said, the level of stress I was under was insane. And then I would come home
Yeah.
to a domestic
Yeah.
abuser.
Yeah.
He would sit there, literally watching his watch, going, like, because one of the little controlling things that he did, and that's why coercive control is so difficult very often when you're in it
Mm.
to actually understand it, because so much of it is presented as safeguarding. So he would go and wait for the train that I normally got when, if the job was kind of quiet, then I would normally get home at around about 7 o'clock, get to the station. And we lived in a pretty rough area. So, the fact that he drove out to pick me up, for me, I was sitting there going, that's nice.
Mm.
And yeah, it can be a bit scary walking home at night, sort of like 7 o'clock at night when it's dark in wintertime through, bandit country,
Mm.
So that bit looks caring. But then the trouble was that I would also, sometimes I wouldn't be able to get the 7 o'clock train because something had kicked off, and a lot of my clients were based at, overseas. So, they would, crises don't run on a diary,
Mm.
they just happen, and then you have to react to them. And as I said, because these were very expensive clients, paying my company a lot of money, you can't just sit there and go, oh, I'm sorry, it's
Yeah.
time for me to go home. You're on your own, love.
Yeah.
So I would have to just kind of drop everything and get on with what have you. So I would very often just send a text saying, won't be on the train. See you later. I'll let you know when I get a minute. And then I would walk into an absolute shit show. He would be fuming with rage. And I would sit there going, you know what, I can't do anything about it. This is the industry that I work in.
Yeah.
And at the time I was getting a very, very, very good wage. And I said, ultimately, this is you enjoy the fruits of this.
Yeah.
We have a nice life, very comfortable life that largely I'm providing. You can't have it. You can't have your cake and eat it. This is the downside of it. Is this?
Yeah.
But he wanted me to work kind of very regular hours in a kind of very mundane job. But at the same time, he also wanted the, huge
Lifestyle.
sums of money.
Yeah, he wanted the lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, if he was a woman, he'd be called a gold digger because he loved the lifestyle. I remember seeing him standing outside. We moved to a nicer part of London. We had a very, very nice house, very obviously a very nice house from the outside in a very nice area. And I remember I was sitting in the front room at one point with our child, who not long, she was about 1 or 2, no, probably about 3 actually, and he was chatting outside. The window was open. He couldn't see me, but he was chatting outside with one of his colleagues. And the colleague was saying, God, you've done really well. How did you manage to buy this house and what have you? And he gave this whole long spiel about how he had managed to buy the house. And I was like sitting there going, I put down something like an 80% deposit.
Yeah.
All of it is mine, and the 20% that I didn't put down is a mortgage that I'm paying half of anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is all about male entitlement, where everything that is good about the child, about the lifestyle, reflects, is taken as being a reflection of the man, and everything that's bad, the domestic abuse, the womanizing, the lying, the drink, the drugs, is somehow a reflection on the woman. It's like when Children's Services, when I first approached them, and I was saying, he's taken my child hostage. He's got this huge long list of, there's 19 years professional evidence of domestic abuse. This is part of an ongoing pattern. The social worker, the first thing that she said to me was, you need to be careful that you don't act in a way that could be interpreted as being hysterical. And I was like, I'm sorry, what on earth are you talking about? Yeah. And she said, well, the way that you're protesting or talking about this, you could be seen as hysterical. And I was like, well, A, that's a very misogynist thing to say for a start. I said, but B, I'm explaining to you a 19-year history of domestic abuse where my child has just been kidnapped and is being used as a hostage. And what I'm doing is presenting evidence, like physical evidence, arrest warrants, letters from doctors. I said, this is what I do when I'm presenting the case for a client. And nobody regards that as being hysterical behaviour to make an argument and then present the evidence that proves the argument. And I found the whole thing instantly bizarre for a start, because I'm used to working in very high stress situations. And I knew that from my previous experience of social services, this is not a bunch of people to trust in the situation that you're in. So I was being very careful to present it all, much as I'm talking to you now.
Yeah.
I was presenting it calmly, and I was evidencing it, because I thought, I don't need to get hysterical, because I'm telling the truth and I can prove that I'm telling the truth.
Yeah.
And then
So at that point, you'll have been thinking it was just going to be an open and shut thing, wouldn't you? Your child would have been returned, and that would have been it.
I thought, in the
Because you know
same way that,
what? If there'd have been an ounce of common sense anywhere, that is exactly what should have
well,
happened.
I thought when it's, like you walk into the building and it says, it talks about being children's services, child protection.
Yeah.
So I thought it does what it says it does on the tin.
Mm.
In the same way that I walked into family court and it says a court on the outside of the building. So I think, oh, this is a place that is built on truth and evidence and facts.
Mm.
So I kind of thought that I knew the territory that I was in, and I thought, oh, this is, I'm used to dealing with, as I said, CEOs of multinational companies, and they're used to dealing with facts and evidence and what have you. So when I was seeing the social worker, I was thinking all I had to do was present the evidence. And then she was saying to me, well, it's very difficult in these situations with domestic abuse. It's like he said, she said. And I said, no, take me out of that scenario. And I said, he says this, like he says my home is dangerous and overcrowded and I got mental health issues. And that's why he's safeguarding the child. He's not got her hostage. He's simply protecting her from this crazy woman running around this overcrowded house. And I said, but take me out of that equation because he says that the house is overcrowded and overpopulated. And I said, and the council, who have, because I have lodgers, I have to have a safety certificate. So this is what the council says about my house. So you don't need to sit there and go, he said, she said. This is like he said, and this is what the council say. I said the same with when my daughter went through the bullying. He said me going into the school doing 27 safeguarding meetings was a thing that I was basically had anger management problems, and I was just going into school kicking off at the teachers because I was, crazy with anger. And I said, once again, take me out of that scenario. These are the letters my daughter's doctor wrote to the school. This is the letter from the consultant paediatrician talking about the level of physical and mental distress my child was going through because the school were just not dealing with these boys. And I said, this is what the Department of Education said, because I ran a full complaint with them, and they found in my favour and my daughter's favour that the school had not operated from their own bullying and equalities policies. So I said, what you're trying to do is fuzzy the water here and trying to make it like, oh, we just couldn't possibly know. And you're trying to make it out like I don't have any evidence, whereas I very clearly do.
Yep.
And she basically wouldn't take any notice of that. And then when I spoke to her manager and I said, I objected to the language that they were using towards me. And I said, I don't understand why you're not taking any notice of evidence that would be acceptable in a court of law.
But do you know what? That could have stopped there. That scenario could have stopped exactly there at that point.
If they had been doing a fact-based assessment, that would have stopped it right there.
Yeah.
But instead, when I was asking the manager why he wasn't taking any notice and why the social worker wasn't taking any notice of, professional evidence, he sat there and said, oh, it's all self-generated. And I said to him, what do you mean self-generated? And he said, well, I said, how can I self-generate broken ribs? He said to me, you might have broken your own ribs yourself.
Oh my God.
And I said, well, these ribs were broken, 13 years ago. So I said, I haven't reported him. So I said, why would I have broke my own ribs and then not reported that to the authorities? If I was doing it for a malicious purpose, I said, it doesn't really seem very sensible to break my own ribs and not report him for it.
I'm surprised he didn't come up with some sort of scenario that, made up how you actually broke your own ribs.
Well, no, what he said was you may have been keeping that, as a kind of card to play at a later stage.
Right.
And I said, 13 years later for a hostage situation that I didn't know was going to happen? I said, that is an amazing piece of, like, I'm
Yeah.
really playing the long game there,
Yeah.
aren't I? But that was the level of
Yeah.
prejudice. So there was no money passing hands in that scenario. This is purely about prejudice.
But like I said, it could have stopped there. But they're like,
Oh,
but
absolutely, totally.
how much money has crossed from that point there when it could have stopped, right? To present date, how much money has got circulated through that system?
The point I'm making is that social services didn't make any money out of that scenario.
Yeah.
They were doing it just out of spite.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing it just to sit there and go, you are the mother, and therefore anything that bad that happens in this cannot be the man's fault. It's got to be the mother's. It's got to be the woman's. And in fact, they, like, if you look at some of the language that they use, which is repeatedly used towards women but not men. There's, they take children for risk of emotional harm.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of their scenarios. They kept saying that I was emotionally harmful to my daughter for reporting his domestic abuse.
Yeah.
So what they were essentially doing was DARVOing me.
Mm-hmm.
It was like they were clearing out all of the domestic abuse, and then they basically started slagging me off. And they, at one point, I did a subject access request, and they, one of the people that had taken a phone call from me said that she thought I was either drunk or on drugs, and that was recorded in my notes. So I was like sitting there going, if you read through, and there was another email that I'd sent to them where the person that received the email then said, oh, this is terribly confused and garbled. And I'd actually, before I'd sent the email to them, I'd cleared it with my legal, solicitor to say, does this sound okay? Because I don't want to sound hysterical. I don't want to sound like I'm a person that breaks my own ribs. So I'd already cleared it with a number of people, and they said, no, that reads fine. That sounds, reasonable and evidenced and what have you. So I sent it over, and then the person that read it said, oh, the woman's clearly crazy and garbled and sort of is obviously. Woo-hoo. So it just, what I found, and that has been the case with every single thing. The family court was no different. The fact that, the moment someone says we're not going to look at facts.
Yeah.
You sit there and go, well, we're in a very, very, very strange place if facts are, and also, like, I think that is one of the things that is so difficult for women. And I think in the same way, if you look at people that are engaged in war, they talk about a thing called shock and awe tactics. I think Americans do it a lot. And when they invaded Iraq, they did this thing called shock and awe, where they basically kind of declared war, and literally within 2 minutes their bombers were just literally bombing the hell out of everything. I think family court use the same scenario. It's a shock and awe tactic. So what they do is they say, right, we'll not allow you to bring any facts in. And then after that, that shocks you to the core, because most people, you'd want the facts of the situation. If you're looking to protect the child, you would sit there and go, well, who am I meant to be protecting the child from? And if you're not interested in that, then you're not interested in child protection at all. So, as I said, I walked into court thinking that it was a court, and it's literally, you walk into a place. It's like walking into a hospital. It says hospital over the door. It's got a big red cross on the door. You open the doors, and literally they grab you by the feet, string you up. They've slit your throat before you've even, your feet have left the floor. You're in an abattoir. And you're just literally kind of looking around going, what the hell happened there? I thought this was a hospital. And now I'm literally hanging upside down with my throat cut, bleeding out. And I think that is the scenario that most women go through in family court, and certainly when you see some of the the surveys on Twitter where they ask how many people that have alleged domestic abuse who've been refused a fact finding, it's consistently about 60% of people
Yeah.
that have allegations of domestic abuse where they've been refused a fact finding.
Yeah.
And you end up thinking, but that is the kind of that is the gold standard of what they're meant to be doing.
Yeah.
So I end up thinking, if you're not following the gold standard, you're not even trying to do the right
But
thing.
they won't be
here.
able to do that if they were opened up, because it'd be under scrutiny, wouldn't it? There'd be
Maybe they wouldn't be able to do it, but I don't really have an awful lot of things. Maybe it would just turn into, like Gladiators, where basically the family court would open it up and then say, "Look at us, look." In Iran and places like that, they're bringing back stoning of women. So why not have family court open so that all of the misogynists and the Andrew Tate followers can all sit there and watch us being stoned to death?
So what do you think? What do you think is the answer to it all?
Oh God, now you're asking. I'm sorry, the first thing that comes to my mind is a tank. I think that essentially, I have a certain amount of sympathy for the people that are rioting, because they sit there talking about two-tier policing, and I think, I have exactly experienced two-tier policing. And I think a lot of the girls in Rotherham probably felt that they were experiencing two-tier policing. So I guess that possibly what we need is to get rid of pornography. I think that drives a lot of violence against women, and also a lot of denigrating of women, testimony experience. And I think then we also need to make certain things, instead of it being guidance, it needs to be mandatory.
Yeah.
That statutory guidance needs to be implemented, and for people to have to make the case as to why they didn't follow the guidance.
Yeah.
And that to be a prosecutable offence, so that in cases, say, such as mine, at the moment, I am literally in and out of suicide prevention programs because of how badly I have suffered. And I end up sitting there thinking the only thing that keeps me going is the fact that I don't want my child to be she is, unfortunately, she has been kind of triangulated into his abuse of me in order to keep herself safe. She's had to go along with quite a lot of what he has done to me. And I think that is part of the reason she has very poor psychological health at the moment, and is really suffering herself. And I think a lot of it is guilt, because he's made her participate in the abuse of me. And I would hate to leave her with the legacy of my mum committed suicide, and I had a part to play in that.
How old is she now?
I probably don't want to get into too many details, because I don't want to be able to, like they talk about jigsaw identification, but she's out of school, let's put it that way. And the problem is that, the children's services and the court have kind of like sat there and said, well, it's very sad what has happened here. And I sit there and go, as if you guys didn't have, it is sad because of you, because you've done this. It wasn't me not wanting to do a fact finding, it was you. You turned me down 5 times, and even when I took it to the Court of Appeal, they refused to to reinstate the case. And then when I opened a second case up, they issued a barring order against me and issued costs against me. So, and the court, people in the court kept saying, oh, well, this is a very complex case. Your case is very complex. And I sat there and thought, it's not complex, it's a bugger's muddle. And it's been made a bugger's muddle because you guys all cut corners at the beginning. Anyone who does any kind of proper, decent, professional work says that right at the beginning, you need to sort out the facts. You need to do due diligence so that you know that when you head off to get something sorted out, you're heading in the right direction. Well, the court deliberately said, no, we're not going to look at what the facts are. And then they have spent, essentially, they put a bag over their head and they have spent the entire time wandering around with their head up their own arse. And then sitting there going, oh, it's very complicated. No, you're just really stupid and you're quite lazy and you haven't done your job. You haven't even tried to do your job. And every time I've tried to point out where you're going wrong, you have punished me. You've issued costs against me. You've basically, you've played and cut and pasted the entire process together in order to achieve an outcome that you wanted before I'd even opened my mouth, which was that the dad is seen as some kind of hero and that I am seen as some kind of psycho witch. And so the sadness is that, as I said, I'm on the brink of, topping myself and regularly have to be talked down off the shelf by a number of different people. And my daughter is not far off that herself. And those are injuries to our psychological state that the court has directly done. That it's been that they aren't mental health conditions, they are injuries, and the court did them.
Yeah.
And police have done them, and children's services have done them, because all of them are toxic partners in this relationship. When a domestic abuse survivor goes to any of these service providers, it's like sticking your head in a noose.
Yeah.
You've got no idea of whether the person that is at the other end of the rope is going to take your head out or string you up.
Yeah. And it's got to stop. It's got to stop.
Yeah, and when you say, well, sort of what are the solutions? I don't know, because these people aren't trying to be fair. And if you look at the history of the suffragettes, they fought and fought and fought for the vote, and it was only when they started setting things on fire did people actually start taking them seriously. So I wonder whether we do need to get a couple of tanks and put a couple of holes in the side of Parliament. And I think they might sit there and go, "Oh, dreadful women."
I don't think personally it's gonna. Well, I'm hoping and praying that this new shifting government is going to make a change. I'm hoping.
Well, the government, they're sitting there going, we're going to halve violence against women and girls. And I was thinking, not with these courts, you're not with this police force, you're
this
not.
Is why, but this is why they need opening up and making sure that there's accountability across the board. I think it needs to be one organisation to join the gaps up, because if I sit in a meeting, right, with either police or social workers, I'll say, well, hold on a minute, that's not right, and I'll take that complaint procedure on. Now, whether the
complaint procedures are not
I know they're not.
They're purely there to protect the institution and also to exhaust the victim.
Of course they are, 100%. They are.
I've done 19 of them, and I used to write complaints.
But why do you think that I push the limits with social media and the media? Because it's the only thing. It's the only thing that works. Because they do not care about anything else.
Because you're a gobby truth teller.
Well, yeah, there is that as well. But do you know what? I'm not going to change either, because You can go down. I've said it all. I've been saying this for years. I've been through all them procedures. I've been through system, and I've been put through ringer. Believe me. And the thing is, you know, the only thing that's going to do anything is by getting the general public to get more awareness around what's happening. And the only way to do that is to expose it in this manner, because it is happening to, you know, it's happening to you know, to people that are very much clued up, you know, clued up, intelligent women. And the thing is, this can literally happen to anybody, can't it? Anybody, from any gender, any age, any profession, any background. And the thing is, until they have come even close to experiencing a fraction of the reality of what is actually happening, they have no idea what is going on.
I think the thing is that ultimately this system is working exactly how it was set up.
Exactly, it is.
And it is a continuation of, you know, the Catholic Church scandal. Essentially the system is set up to protect men and their ownership of children.
Well, it's definitely. I can confirm without shadow of a doubt. It's definitely there to set women up to fail.
Yeah, and
100%.
It's built on a 2,000-year history of doing exactly that.
Yeah.
You know, Eve was the person that introduced all evil into the world, and basically our PR hasn't got any better than that. It's always been that whatever bad happens in the world, it's always a female is responsible for it. And so it's the same with family court, that if something bad has happened in the family, it's not the guy that's taking drugs in the corner, that's drinking and beating people up. It's got to be his partner. Somehow or other, it's always the female's fault. And so, I don't know how this system changes. I think it's an interesting argument to say that basically the police force and children's services and everything should be all basically one unit to deal with domestic abuse. And I would say that also there shouldn't, I don't think there should be male officers on it. I think that most men are so involved in pornography and Andrew Tate stuff that I don't really think that they understand what abuse is, because I think a lot of them are very aligned with that way of thinking. Certainly my experience of being interviewed by the police, you know, each time I've had anything to do with domestic abuse, I've been interviewed by a male. And some of them I've actually, you know, when they've come into my house, I've actually had to ask them to leave for my own safety. So I end up sitting there thinking, I don't think these guys are fit for purpose, or I think that they should be going through very extreme psychological testing to make sure that the police are constantly being accused in national inquiries of being misogynistic. And that is the base attitude that drives domestic abuse. So you can't have someone who is supportive of domestic abuse.
I have worked alongside some good male officers.
I'm not saying that all men are like that.
They are few and far between, unfortunately. But
in the end,
then I've worked alongside some not nice female officers as well.
Oh no, totally. There are plenty of female misogynists.
Yeah.
It is a worldwide system. I'm not saying that women just, you know, they automatically are angels and men are devils. I'm not saying that, but ultimately, you know, people like Andrew Tate, their following is almost exclusively male. Pornography.
But why is he not locked up?
Because he's a man. And what he's doing is not, he's very popular amongst men. So you can't sit there and say, oh, well, it's men aren't like this, whilst they're very clearly showing you what they like. If someone spends an awful lot of time looking at media that call women bitches and sluts, and then, sort of shows, spends an awful lot of time saying, well, women are evil and what have you, you end up sitting there thinking that tells you something about the attitudes of that particular person.
Yeah.
And then if you put them in a police uniform, that's, and they're going along to deal with domestic abuse. I mean, but the person that arrested my abuser, essentially, he was absolutely trying to do his best to arrest me, first of all, because he was saying, how dare you fight in front of your child, and you are a sort of like, this is child abuse and you are a co-abuser. And I was saying to him, I wasn't fighting. The guy had me pinned to the bed and was repeatedly punching me in the head. He's thrown a table at me. He's thrown a glass at me. I was trying to climb out of a window to get away from him, and he yanked me back into the room and threw me on the bed. I said, I was being attacked.
Yeah.
And then he said, oh, he's got a scratch on his neck. And I said, yeah, I was trying to defend myself. Are you, that is part of common law, that you are allowed to defend yourself if someone is physically attacking you,
Yeah.
as long as you use commensurate level of force. So I said, are you telling me that if someone punches you in the head 9 or 10 times that you can't do a thing to try and defend yourself? I said, I have my car keys in my hand, and I was trying to push him off and fight him off. So yeah, he probably did get a scratch. But I said, I'm covered in bruises where he's kicked me round the house and thrown his boots at me. I said, there's glass, where he's thrown a glass at me down the, in the garden where I was hanging out the washing, and that's where it all started from. So I said, you can see from the physical evidence that I have been, I have been under sustained attack.
But we can stand up to this. We can fight this. We can as a collaboration. Of course we can.
We shouldn't have to be fighting the first. This was the cavalry coming over the hill. I didn't phone them. Our next door neighbour phoned them because he could hear, he could hear me being attacked, and he could hear my daughter screaming, "No, daddy, no." And like I was having to say to the policeman, he was standing in front of me, literally in my face, going, basically, we're going to arrest you and take your child off you. And I was sitting there saying, if a 3-year-old child can work out who the aggressor is, I said, she was shouting, "No, daddy, no." So she could see who was attacking me. You've got that in the notes from the neighbour.
Yeah.
And yet you were in my face shouting at me. And the thing was that luckily, as I said, because I'm used to dealing with crises and standing up to CEOs of national companies, international companies, I'm used to speaking truth to power. But if I had been a 20-year-old girl who'd just been attacked, and then she has another angry male, but this time in a police uniform, standing in her face going, "You are the problem here. You're a co-abuser." I don't, she probably would have ended up being arrested and possibly criminalised with her child taken off her.
Yeah.
It was only the fact that I know common law, so I was like sitting there going, "What, are you telling me that as a woman I don't have the right to defend myself?" And then he kind of went, "Well, no, I'm not saying that." And I said, "Well, it certainly sounds like you are." And I said, "I don't know of anything in English law that says because I'm female, I'm not allowed to defend myself, or because I'm in my own home, I'm not allowed to defend myself. Are you telling me that my domestic environment is exempt from UK law?" And he was like, "Well, no, of course not." And I said, "Well, you need to back up a bit, because I don't know what he's told you, and maybe you should run me through his story, because you haven't even asked me what happened. And so then, as I said, finally I got this guy to walk back a bit, and then he started telling me what my ex had told him. And I was saying, look, if you look at the physical evidence, it doesn't fit anything that he is saying, whereas it does fit what I'm saying. And I said, you were phoned by the next door neighbour, so it's not like I've had time to set up the scene to make it work. I said, you rocked up out of the blue, and this is what you can see. And I said, if you look at the evidence, nothing fits what he's saying, including my ex said that the reason the fight broke out was because I was wanting to go gardening in a pair of brand new shoes, and he thought I was going to ruin those shoes. And I said to the police officer, look at the shoes I'm wearing. They're a pair of crusty old garden shoes that I just put them on to walk down the garden to put the washing out. So I said, do these look brand new to you? And he was like, no, there's a lot about his story that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I said, no, because he's lying through his teeth. So he did eventually get arrested, but I literally had to do all of the analytic work, because the police officer was, the male one was straight in my face, and, you know, he'd gone off, he'd interviewed my ex, and then he basically came out of that kind of almost iridescent with rage against me, saying, you know, you're a bad mum for fighting in front of your child. And I was like, I wasn't. So as I said, I haven't had a different experience from the multitude of male police officers. The one that was, you know, I've been investigated for stalking, for trying to see my daughter once in 4.5 years, where I was trying to give her safeguarding reports. The police are trying to make that into a stalking case. And I said, that's one visit in 4.5 years. You cannot say that this is what's stalking meant to be, the 4 definition. It's meant to be fixated, obsessive, unwanted, and repetitive or something. You know, that's a single visit in 4.5 years. And I said, it's to give her safeguarding reports. I said, if I'm going to attack someone, it wouldn't be with a bunch of paper reports if I'm trying to frighten them. So at every stage, every single agency has tried to hide the domestic abuse. It's not that they've missed it, they've actually been actively trying to hide it. So I think there is a real problem.
It's because you've challenged it. It's because you've challenged it. And then once you challenge it, you're just setting yourself up for it.
But I didn't start by challenging them. They've started by trying to hide it. I challenged them hiding it. So they started that process even before I challenged it. I was challenging the fact that they were hiding it. And that's what they don't like. And if you go into any other process, the idea, like the thing that where they're saying they're taking children off mothers for risk of emotional harm. Can you imagine locking black people up for risk of future criminal behaviour? I mean, there is absolutely no way that people would get away with that shit. And yet they're doing it to women and saying, well, take your child off you.
Yeah.
For an invisible risk that hasn't happened yet. It's like you cannot be locked up, which is essentially what they're doing. If you take a child away from a parent, but a mother particularly, I think, that is, you may as well stick her in a cage.
Yeah.
Because her life as she knows it is pretty much over. You know, and I've done that for the past 5 years, and every day is a struggle. Every single day is a fight to keep my sanity, because I feel like both legs and arms have been chopped off, because my daughter was my heart, and they've ripped it out.
Yeah.
And nothing is left that gives me joy. You know, she was my only remaining family member that's alive. You know, I probably won't see my grandchildren. I won't probably see her ever again, because she's been so indoctrinated.
But maybe she'll watch this.
I doubt it. I doubt it very much, because she has been so indoctrinated against me by professionals. I mean, when the professional, the children's services found out that I was intending on seeing her, my IDVAs very kindly phoned them up and said, "Oh, the mother's like saying that she's now going to go and see the child with these safeguarding reports because children's services and the police are refusing to engage with them." So my IDVA phoned children's services up as a kind of, I think she was like saying this could put the child at risk because it's escalating the risk. But I was like thinking, what else do I do? What else do I do if the statutory agencies are refusing very senior assessments from the domestic abuse sector? You know, it's the equivalent of my daughter being left in a burning building. You know, I can see that she's not doing well in that situation. She, you know, children's services were getting, you know, notified of all sorts of stuff that where things weren't going well with my child. And so, and they were saying, well, basically, we're just going to leave her in the burning building because no physical harm is happening to her that we can see or that we are being told of. And I sit there and go, but there's more than one type of harm in a burning building. If she is inhaling smoke, she is just as likely to die. And that's how I see coercive control. It's the smoke of the fire, not the flame.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was sitting there going, I need to get her out of that situation. And if statutory agencies won't help, and if they won't engage with very, very senior, you know, world experts on you know, coercive control, who've sat there and said, you've got a problem and that you haven't done a proper risk assessment and the methodology you're using is completely flawed, then I defy any parent not to sit there and go, I phoned the fire brigade, they won't come out. I phoned the police, they won't come out. You know what? I'm going to go and grab a ladder and drag it up to the building and I'm getting my kid out of there myself.
Yeah.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
That's your job as a parent, is not to leave your kid in a burning building, you know, sucking in smoke, is to get them out. But because they were told by my IDVA that was what I was intending to do, is go and see my daughter, well away from the dad, so he wouldn't know anything about it. Children's services phoned my ex, told him that I was planning on seeing our child, and then my ex told my child that basically mental health professionals, not IDVAs, had phoned children's services, tipped them off because they were so concerned that I physically might attack my child or kidnap her. My child was then fitted with an electronic tracking device that went straight through to the police. There was various different, you know, the police recommended that he take out a non-mole against me, said that I could be done for stalking. It was basically the police, children's services, and my abuser basically trying to come up with the most life-threatening story they could about me to tell my child. So when I did actually turn up, like I saw her in a public place, like a railway station, she ran across busy roads because she was terrified, because she thought that I was trying to kidnap or kill her. That's what she said in court. She said that she thought I was there to kidnap or kill her. And all of that fear had been made, it had been engineered in order to control her. And certainly it had been engineered directly by some of it by children's services. And then when I was saying that, you know, police asked me to come in because they wanted to interview me for stalking. And I was saying there's a whole much wider context to this.
They won't look at it.
They were sitting there going, we're not interested in any of that. And I said, but you have to be, because if you look at police guidance in handling domestic abuse, they talk about domestic abusers' use of false allegations to swap to reverse the
Yeah.
victim and offender.
Yeah.
And so I said, if you're not going to look at the context of my visit, you can't work out, like in the same way that if my daughter was standing in the middle of the road, I said, and I run over to her and I push her out of the way. I said, if there is no traffic coming and I have a history of physical violence, you would say that's an assault. But if I have no history of of physical violence and there's a car coming, I'm saving her life. And if you won't look at the context between those two backgrounds, you're not doing your job. So I said, there is absolutely no way in hell you can say that this is a stalking case when it's only one visit in 3.5 years to pass on safeguarding information that names my daughter as a co-victim. And you keep telling me that she is Gillick competent, but no one has given her these reports. She doesn't know that any of these senior domestic abuse assessors are saying that she is being victimised in the same way that I am by the same perpetrator. So some of this is just, it's about literally having to stand up really hard. But I was interviewed back in March 23 last year, and they haven't given me a single update since then, but they are still apparently trying to progress the investigation, because that's what my ex said. In court, he said that I am still being investigated for stalking. So once again, he was using that actively in the non-molestation to sit there and go, she needs a non-molestation because she's also, stalking as well. And all of this was being engineered around a single visit that lasted all of 5 seconds. And my child was openly saying in court that she was told that I physically might be trying to kill her or kidnap her. She said in court that I chased her down the road and I was hiding behind trees. And I was sitting there going, but that didn't happen. I can understand why she felt that it might, because she'd been put into such a heightened state of fear. But I said, I'm a 62-year-old woman with rheumatoid arthritis, and she is a young woman who does track athletics.
Yeah.
She took off like a gazelle. And I hobbled after her like a troll.
Bless you.
There is absolutely no way, shape, or form that I was a threat to her, even if I wanted to be. But as I said, my main thing also that really concerned me was that she ran across a number of roads without looking. We were in rush hour traffic, and I was like sitting there going, she is so frightened.
Yeah.
And I didn't know why, because I didn't know that my advice had tipped off children's services, and suddenly I had become the threat to her safety. And I was like, why would me giving her safeguarding reports from a number of domestic abuse assessors be a threat to her physical safety?
Yeah.
So none of it makes sense. It's all, a kind of cut and pasted, cobbled together. We'll take this bit, but we'll leave that bit out. It's what's known as a selective, it's evidence sifting.
Yeah.
They have an agreed objective, which is she's mad and she's the problem. And we have done our, if they don't make me the villain of the piece, they've got to admit that they aligned with the abuser from day one, which may actually make them liable to a legal case for compensation. So they're protecting their own arses from their own incompetence.
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, I'm gonna close this down now.
Absolutely. There's probably a whole bunch of people watching this going,
oh, Gil. I think it's something that we've got to keep ploughing at, and you're not going anywhere. You are not going anywhere until this mission is accomplished, basically, because it will. It's like I've said before. I'll not stop while ever I've got air in my body, purely because we can't. This is still happening, and it's happening to others, and we can't leave this as it is. It's happening to so many that can't speak
I
out.
totally agree with you, but I think there is a special kind of pain that happens when you lose your child. And I know that people say, oh, she'll come back. But certainly if you look at the people that study, the people that study alienated children, for want of a better word, but, no one has really kind of done studies about coercively controlled children that have been completely brainwashed. But if you look at women that are coercively controlled, very often they'll stay in a relationship for 20 or 30 years. So there's no reason why, my daughter would be any different. So in which case I'm not going to be alive in 20 or 30 years when she comes to her senses, if she ever does. And my biggest fear for her is domestic abuse induced suicide, because her mental situation is really, really not good, and nor is mine, because we're both in terrible, terrible pain at having been separated, and also to have her entire memory system has been completely erased and overwritten and messed about, to the point where she doesn't recognize up from down. She says that she doesn't care anymore about her dog. I sit there and go, what was it? Was your dog an abuser too? Because she's now, as I said, saying, all of the fear that she felt from the bullying was, down to me. And I'm sitting there going, but you gave loads and loads of evidence to your doctors and your paediatricians and all of the people round that, yes, you were definitely frightened at the time, but it was because of the bully. And as I said, likewise, she's now sort of like saying that she doesn't care about her own dog, and the dog means nothing to her. And I sit there and go, but that was your dog. You loved her.
Yeah.
So, and interestingly, she says that I was constantly, attacking the animals as well. And yet she's left the dog that she loves with me. So much of her story and her behaviour is just racked with all of these inconsistencies, which, I sort of sat there thinking, when you're a kid, you loved strawberries. I love strawberries. And, no matter how many times your dad tells you that you don't like strawberries and feeding you strawberries was an abuse, in the end, your body knows that it likes strawberries. The truth leaves its own path.
Yeah.
And that's the few letters that I've been able to send her during the court process. I've just had to keep saying the truth leaves its own trail, and it's not going to do you any good to join in with your dad's lying. I know it keeps you safe at the, in the immediate, but it messes with your head. And that's what I'm more concerned about, is that the long-term psychological damage that this is doing her.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we'll keep banging the drum while they keep giving us the sticks to do it with.
Exactly. And listen, I'll see you next weekend, hopefully. Maybe.
Absolutely, yeah. For more banging of the drum,
yes,
with more angry women.
Yes. There's many of us, so yeah, we've got to keep doing it.
They should give a very careful thought to both the Russian Revolution and the French Revolution were started by mothers protesting about the fact they couldn't feed their children any longer. So they should be careful, because I'm sitting there looking at the guillotine, sitting over there thinking, you know what, I'm going to start sharpening that, because I think if they continue the way they're going, I think we're heading for a mass uprising, because there are so many angry people in this country saying that this country is not doing the basics right.
No, exactly.